Jean-Michel was a really vital part of the New York art scene during the 70s and the 80s, as many of you already know. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. He first met Kenny Scharf, this gentleman over here, in 1979 at the School of Visual Arts. And Kenny, was it 78? There we go. And Kenny will fill you in more on that encounter and what that was about. But they then exhibited in some of the same group shows, and their paths crossed many, many times in the downtown clubs and in the East Village art scene. And they developed a friendship. They both produced, both Kenny Scharf and Jean-Michel produced commissions for the Palladium nightclub, which is, we're sitting in the recreation of one of the rooms in the nightclub. And Jeffrey Deitch, art dealer and curator, first encountered Jean-Michel's work in 1978, and he'll share more about that encounter in a little bit as well. And in 1980, wrote the first mention of Jean-Michel's work in the press. I did not know that. Since then, he's remained deeply supportive of his work and supportive of us as a family in the work that we're doing to honor Jean-Michel. Jeffrey Deitch has been involved with modern and contemporary art for nearly 50 years as an artist, writer, curator, dealer, and advisor. He's best known for his gallery, Deitch Projects, that was from 1996 through 2010. He was the director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, MoCA, from 2010 to 2013. And he currently owns and directs the Jeffrey Deitch Gallery, an art gallery that has locations in both New York and Los Angeles. Kenny Scharf is an American painter known for his participation in New York City's interdisciplinary East Village art scene during the 1980s. Scharf's art making spans painting, sculpture, fashion, video, performance art, and street art. His work has been exhibited widely, including in exhibitions at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, I'm going to mispronounce this, the Stedelijk, thank you, Museum, Amsterdam, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, New York. Jeanine Heriveaux is my sister. And, well, you should clap. Let's hold it so we clap for all three. Jeanine is my sister, and Jeanine and I are both sisters of Jean-Michel. She is the co-executor of the Jean-Michel Basquiat estate, along with me. And she is an amazing and phenomenal human being. And she and I do the really heartwarming and also hard work of preserving Jean-Michel's legacy and of ensuring that his work and his legacy is honored and respected, and just making sure that we kind of have his back as sisters often do. My name is Lisane Basquiat. I'm Jean-Michel's sister, and I'm also the co-executor of Jean-Michel's estate along with Jeanine. And so, first of all, give them all a hand, please. Did I forget anything? Doesn't matter. Okay, there we go. So we have kind of some talking points that we're going to use just to ensure that we hit all the points that we intended to hit. And at the same time, this really is a conversation. And I think what's so beautiful about this for Jeanine and I is that it is this once in a lifetime opportunity for us to sit down and have this conversation about Jean-Michel in this very intimate setting with his friends. And we don't get to do that often. And so that is what makes this one of the reasons that this is such a special experience for us. And I just want to really thank both of you, because I know you're both incredibly, incredibly busy, and really want to thank you for taking time out of your lives to come and sit down and chat with Jeanine and me about Jean-Michel. Yeah. So I guess, why don't we start? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I would love to hear from from Kenny, his first meetings with Jean-Michel, what that downtown New York art scene was.
You got it.
Let's do it.
So I moved to New York City at the age of 19 from LA, grew up here. And I had this idea in my head about why I needed to be in New York to be an artist. And I wanted to meet exceptional people that I knew were there. And so I arrived at School of Visual Arts, and I was kind of disappointed my very first couple days. It just seemed like all the kids to me looked like the same suburban kids where I grew up in the Valley. Just the same. I was like, and they were suburban kids from Long Island mostly. And they all look the same. And I was like, oh, that's not really what I think. And then one day, I walked into the cafeteria. The cafeteria of SVA was kind of this hangout place. And there is Jean. He was 17, I'm 19. And he just kind of looks at me, and I lock eyes with him. And my first reaction was like, who is this guy? He was intense. He had an intensity about him. And he looked at me and he said, let's see what's in there. And I had this, those portfolios that artists used to walk around with, this black with the zipper. So, oh yeah, okay. And then I show him this painting, and he says, you're going to be famous. I was like, what? Like, what a thing to say to someone that you just met. And I just was like, what? It really hit me. And then, this guy is something about this guy. And then we discovered that we were living just a block away from each other in Chelsea at the time. And so we kind of started hanging out, and he introduced me to Al Diaz, his Samo partner, and I introduced him to Keith Haring.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And so I used to walk around the streets with Sean, and he had his marker, and he would do the Samo, and then he handed it to me, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And then I drew like a TV set, and I wrote The Jetsons in it. Anyway, so then I went up to where he was staying, and I didn't know much more about him than what I'm describing. And then I see this, all these collages and drawings all scattered on the floor. And there was this one piece like in the wall, it was like in the kitchen. And I looked at it, and I was like, I swear, like, I've never seen this piece again. It's probably destroyed. But the image, it blew me away. It was a drawing / collage on paper of a Kennedy assassination. And just the way it was drawn, and the thing about Jean's work that hit me then, the first time I saw it, and every single time I see it to this day, is the energy powering you. Like, literally, I looked at it, and I felt like somebody had just socked me in the face, and it like threw me. To this day, I'm like describing it. It gets me excited because I could see there was so much power and energy in the scratchy, crazy, erratic drawing. And so I was kind of blown away by him right away. So that's how we met. And right away I knew this is someone important to me. And then, so when he started to become friends with Keith, and for a time, it was like we were like the three musketeers of the East Village.
Do we all know what the East Village is? Okay, I just want to make sure. Do we all know what the Jetsons are? Okay, I just want to check in. Check in and see who's in the room. I think there are two things about that are really beautiful. One is how profound and prophetic Jean-Michel always was, and how so much of what he talked about back then is still a reality today. And the fact that he called your incredible talent and was prophetic even in that.
Also that the word famous is like, I don't know, it just hit me like famous. Like, what are you talking about famous? And then, so right after that, he started So he did his SAMO like in the lobby of the school. He wasn't a student. He just
Right.
liked to
That's
hang
the
out
funny part about it.
in the cafeteria to meet
Yeah.
artists and whatnot. And so one morning or day, I don't know what time, I'm coming in there. He is in front, and they go, "They won't let me in." And I go, "Oh," and I said, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, I forged a note from one of my teachers and signed it. "Oh, please allow Jean-Michel to come in." I don't remember what the whole thing. And he went inside and he bombed the entire school. It was insane that the people were freaked out. All the people. Anyways, my note didn't work after that.
It didn't work out. It wasn't so good. They were
That
kind
was
of
the
done.
last
They
of
were a
us
little
hanging
done
out
with
in
you
the
and your
lobby,
letters. Yeah. That's so cool. Jeffrey. So what's really special about Jeffrey, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is that I was introduced to Jeffrey after Jean-Michel passed away. And Jeffrey was also a friend of Jean-Michel's and was the person who read the eulogy at Jean-Michel's funeral. And so it is extra special to be able to sit here and have this conversation with you all these, years later. And yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that. Yeah.
That was a very sad experience. I remember it vividly. And I had become friendly with your father, Gerard. And so during Jean-Michel's lifetime, and the friendship extended really 20 years beyond.
That's right. Yeah.
So I think to follow up on what Kenny was talking about, so Jean-Michel had this inner compass to get himself right to the center of the discourse. It's an amazing thing he had. So I remember going around, this is in the late 70s, and I was so intrigued by the SAMO tags all over. But if you visited the coolest people, there was a SAMO tag outside their apartment door in the hallway, or on the street, the entry to the building, or in the most interesting clubs. He just understood. He got himself right to the center of the discourse and met the most interesting people and made relationships with them. And I think it's amazing that he attended the School of Visual Arts and got free art supplies and et cetera, without being a student.
He hung out at the School of
Kenny,
Visual
maybe you
Arts.
can talk a little more about that. I think that's amazing.
He just wanted to be where the artists were. He was only 17 back then when he was hanging out in the cafeteria.
So how did you meet him, Jeffrey?
So I had seen the SAMO tags. Then I saw the band Gray a few times, and people point out that that's SAMO. And I remember a vivid memory of him hunched over this black box sound machine. That was his role in Gray. But I didn't meet him until right after the opening of the Times Square show.
Okay.
So I thought that his contribution was just fantastic. And I was determined to meet him. That was when I learned for the first time that there was an artist named Jean-Michel Basquiat who was part of SAMO. And it was Diego Cortez, a great friend of ours, who made the introduction. And so that was sometime the summer of 1980.
And what was your first impression? What was that encounter like, that moment like?
Well, similar to what Kenny was talking about, Jean-Michel had this remarkable charisma. And the power that we see in the art, he embodied in his persona. So sometimes artists, it's hard for them to find their way and get discovered. But from the very beginning, I think the other artists in the scene and the writers and the hangers-on, they all knew that Jean-Michel was an extraordinary talent. It was clear from the very beginning. And so the physical presence, the style, the just really tremendously powerful intelligence. And so over the years that I knew him, I was always so impressed with his photographic memory, that he would recall some snippets of conversation that we had had 3 years previously. He remembered everything. And, that's so much part of the work. And you look at this, and he would flip through an anatomy book, a history book, and retain all the images. And then, like someone does now with an AI generator, he turned it back into his own unique vision.
So Jean-Michel was like the first poster before social media got started, and he was like one of the early AI folks.
Well, see, he was brilliant at communications. So the phenomenon of SAMO was really something. This took over New York City, downtown New York City. Keith Haring had also kind of instinct with the subway chalk posters. So understanding how to communicate and being present without his physical presence and extending his presence, that was a pretty remarkable thing that he figured out.
Jean-Michel was quite dramatic, as you all can tell from his art, and just in everything. He was really, really dramatic about and courageous about the ways that he ensured that he was in the right spaces and meeting the right people. What I'd love to do before we move into more of this conversation is I'd love to also put this into context to better understand how each of you got into art. Like, what was your journey like? How did you wind up here or there? So we'll start, Kenny, I'll start with you.
I love your stories of your teenage years in the Valley. And
I've not heard them.
And
Let's
with
all pull
like
up
a
a
shop
chair.
where they sold comic books and things. So that it's a great story.
So I've always made art. One of my earliest, strongest memories is finger painting in nursery school. I exactly remember what it felt like and looked like, and I just knew. I was like, this is my thing. So I've since I'm 3, this is kind of what I do. And then my parents were very supportive until high school ends, and you're like, okay, now what are you gonna do? I'm like, I'm going to be an artist. Oh, what are you going to do though? But you got to do something. Like, so anyway, I studied art history a little bit at UC Santa Barbara, but I had no art in my life growing up in the Valley, very suburban, Van Nuys. I didn't know other artists. I used to go to...
Oh, you didn't?
No, I didn't know any of that. I used to go to these head shops that were all over LA. And in the head shops, they had psychedelic posters, and they also had slot cars. Is there any old like me knows slot cars? So they had slot car, it was just kind of...
The slot car is the thing where you put the quarter or the dime in and you
have your own car, and there's a track, and everyone collects these cars, and you put them on this track and you race them.
Hot Wheels? Is that what
No, it wasn't Hot Wheels. They were this big.
Oh.
It was a thing, and it must have been the 60s.
That must have been a West Coast thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
West Coast. So I used to go to the head shops, and then I'd look at the posters, and then they had, this typical like psychedelic acid kind of things, but they also had Magritte, and they had Dali, and they had some Rousseau, and so they had some artists as well that I was, oh, this is interesting. And then if all the people that grew up here in LA, when my parents, oh, he really likes art, let's take him to see Pinky and Blue Boy at the Huntington Garden. So that was nice of them. So there I was like, oh, this is a big deal. There's Pinky. Wow. And I'm like, I was excited. I don't know why I liked it so much, but because they took me special. And then, I got older, and I was like, I was in art history at UC Santa Barbara, and I was like, this is so boring here. And then all of a sudden we got to the Andy Warhol's section in the factory, and I'm like, okay, that's it. Sold my car, and I moved to New York.
Wow.
I want to be in some scene, and I wanted the factory. And even though that was the 60s, and this is the 70s, I felt that there was something in New York like that drew me to be there.
Wow.
And then I met Jean like the first week, and Keith Haring as well, the first week I was in New York.
That's pretty amazing. Jeffrey, how did you wind up in art as a passion?
I think so. Kenny mentions Andy Warhol. And so my experience has some parallels, different. So when I was in college, a friend of mine who was much more sophisticated shared copies of Interview magazine with me. And so this was in the early 70s. Interview wasn't the big tabloid side yet. It was folded, much more modest. But I read Interview cover to cover, and that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be where Interview magazine was written.
Wow.
And then there was another magazine that was very influential. It was Avalanche. And so there's always, in the art world, there's always some magazine that's just got it, that is in sync with the latest developments. And in 1972, that was Avalanche. And I saw Vito Acconci on the cover. And so the combination of Interview and Avalanche, I had to get to New York. And I moved to New York City, not knowing a single person. It was 1974. And I just lucked out. The secretary had left at one of the central galleries that showed minimalism and conceptualism. And without really understanding what I was doing, I lucked out. I ended up right in the center, sort of parallel to what happened with Kenny. And so my first day there, I was the secretary in the front office, and the young man in the back mopping the floors and hanging paintings was this genius young artist, Chris D'Arcangelo. And that was the first artist we met. And that evening, I was already inside the New York art scene. We drove up to his studio, and I've been in the same place ever since then.
That is so serendipitous that both of you would kind of see a scene and insert yourself into that scene, and then have those connections happen as quickly and easily as they did.
That was New York back then.
So we have to talk
Let's
about
talk about that
New York
scene.
City in the 70s. Again, this our time period is really 78 into the 80s. And this was a paradise for creative people, for artists, filmmakers, writers. So when I started this job at the gallery, the director said, well, we'll need to get you an apartment. Yeah, sure. And we walked out the back of the building and across the street. And she says, I know there's this artist. He's got a teaching job going in New Jersey. I think he's going to give up his apartment. And I ended up with a rent-controlled apartment that he had renovated beautifully into like a mini loft, $165 a month.
Wow.
Rent-controlled. Sometimes I walked by that building and I said, Thompson Street between Prince and Spring, right in the center. Nice. And I said, why did I ever give up that apartment? Because maybe my rent now would be like $250 a month. But so it was, things were so inexpensive. You didn't have to worry about money. And the most important thing, if you were an aspiring artist, writer, filmmaker, you didn't need a job. There was always something you could pick up, make a few dollars, helping somebody carry boxes into their apartment or paint some walls.
Nightclubs. Most of the artists I knew worked in the nightclubs.
Right. And so a lot of, so I'm slightly older. In my circle, they helped other artists renovate their lofts and, just simple construction jobs. So basically you could live and be creative without money. And there was a luncheonette around the corner from the gallery. The blue plate special was $1.25.
Crazy.
And so, it was, so I read about it now and say New York was a mess and, lots of crime. We didn't really notice, did you? I thought it was great.
Only when someone pulled a knife or gun on me, which happens a few times.
Yeah, I think it's important also to set that scene. I mean, that was a time where, from the outside looking in, it was a lot of abandoned buildings. There was, a mess. The city was almost bankrupt. It was terrible.
Thank God. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to be there.
Exactly. And it was also around the time where, hip hop was taking off and music was changing and film was changing and identity, the way that people of color were being identified in popular culture was starting to shift and change. And then there were all of you folks who were, in this art making and creating the art scene, really. What was that like? Like, take us into that experience of like what it was. So clearly you didn't need a job or, whatever.
I think also, see, the geography that basically you lived near Times Square sometimes, but basically like 80% of the people, the creative community, they lived within walking distance downtown. Soho, Tribeca, Lower East Side, and you met everybody on the street. You didn't need appointments. You didn't need to. People didn't really have the money to go to restaurants and things, but you didn't need it because you met sitting on a loading dock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, everybody. It was like just walk out the door. You don't have to think, oh, what am I gonna do today? Should I go here? Should I go there? You don't know what you're going to do. You walk out the door and, oh, there's someone what are you doing? Oh, I'm going here. Oh, I'll go with you. And then you go there and you go, oh, and by, the day is over. You've been to 10, 20 places and gone on a crazy journey. You have no idea what was in store on any given day. And also back then there was some kind of event or happening every single night, every day, that it was like there was an urgency about going out and seeing people and seeing what, music or some art show or whatever it was, there was an urgency about it. And everybody, we have to go there. That's what's happening tonight. And like, it was like unlike anything. Like now I'm like, oh, will you come to this thing? Oh, I don't know. I'd rather just stay home and go to sleep.
Well, and then there wasn't Eventbrite and things. Like you wanted to go to the kitchen or club, you just walked in.
Yeah.
And there was a kind of velvet rope situation in some clubs, but the people who were in, that didn't really matter. So it was all access. Now, it was also very democratic. So when the money started coming into the art world in the early 80s, things changed.
For the worse.
But so I love the democracy of it.
What do you mean by that, Jeffrey, if you don't mind me asking?
Okay.
The money coming into the art world?
Okay. So this late 70s, early 80s situations, there's almost nobody who had money to be flamboyant with. And so everyone was equal.
Art for art's sake.
Right.
And each other was each other's audience as well.
Right. And then when the money started coming in, there were sort of restaurants like the Odeon that, were not, if we look at it from perspective now, they weren't so expensive, but they were too expensive for most of the artists. But the kind of the elite artists who were selling, they could go there with the collectors. And so...
Well, Jean was the first.
Yeah.
He was the first to come home from Europe with all that cash in his pocket.
Right.
Falling out.
Odeon has great burgers also. I don't eat meat anymore, but burgers
so,
in New York, the Odeon are amazing.
Yeah. So things started in a different way, and there's the Odeon, Mr. Chow, and so there's sort of that period prior to that, and then there's sort of New York in the 80s with Mr. Chow with the Palladium, where the artists connected with fancy people.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately for me, it wasn't so fun anymore. So like when the money arrived, which Jean was the first out of our circle that was like, oh my God, after the New York New Wave show, he went to Italy, Modena, right? And he had that first show.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, he came back and he had this money and he was like going to restaurants, talking about restaurants. And it was like, oh, And it was like this weird, almost like a panic set into the scene where everyone was like, oh, I better make money too. And the whole, I'm not blaming Jean, but it did happen. As soon as that happened, there was this mad like thing about making money. And for me, it lost a lot of the romanticism and the fun of it was over. I remember my first time at Mr. Chow's, and I wasn't used to fancy restaurants and sitting down. I was used to dancing all night long, sweating and drinking and dancing. So then all of a sudden my nightlife became sitting in a restaurant. And I was like, I can't, my ass is hurting me. I'm not used to sitting so much. And it was like, how do I be adult? Is this what adults do?
Yeah.
Like at the same time, I was going along with it because, of course, I had an ambition and I wanted to make money and show in galleries and museums and everything. But at the same time, I felt a little bit sad that it wasn't so much dancing anymore. It was sitting.
But also, see, this new art world, it created a structure that carried the art beyond our little community and brought it to the world.
Right.
Can we just go back a little bit? Jeffrey, you mentioned the Times Square show, which both Jean-Michel and Kenny were in. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that show and how that came about.
I'm just going to take a little credit here.
Let's do it.
Because so I had the show at Club 57, and someone named John Ahern, you might know, there's a great artist. He was part of this group called Collab. And so John Ahern was at my show at the Club 57, and he said, oh, we're doing the show in Times Square. Do you want to be a part of it? Of course I do. I don't know anything about it, but yes. And so he told me where it was and when to come. And I went and got Jean and Keith to come with me. They were not invited. I brought them.
Wow.
And then what an impact both of them made on that show.
Yeah. So this is if you read art history, there are defining events of exhibitions like the first Impressionist show and things like that they're really historical markers. And the Times Square show had that kind of role of setting the agenda for the 1980s. And so as Collab was a structure so that downtown artists could get grants, is that they weren't selling art, but there was at that point the New York State Council on the Arts would give like $20,000 to an art organization. And so that's what Collab was about. So they took some of that money and they rented for next to nothing an abandoned massage parlor on 41st Street, right below Times Square. And it was a crazy building, but it was perfect for this, with show windows, basement, lots of different rooms. And so it was artist organized. One part was John Ahern, Tom Modernis, and then Kiki Smith and some of the women. A lot of them worked in a bar called Tin Pan Alley in Times Square. And so it was their sector, a few other sectors. And this was where uptown and downtown came together. Our friend Fred Brathwaite was very involved, and he brought in some of the graffiti artists. And so it was where you had the mixture of art school artists, or out of people who just came out of New York City community. And it created this mix that defined the 1980s.
It was like the graffiti artists from uptown met with the new wave artists from the East Village. And that's when Keith, a week later, started doing his subway drawings after the meeting.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And so this was not an exhibition. People go to the opening and that's it. It was on the whole summer. I was there basically every night. And it was like an artist club.
So it's like
And there were performances, people hung out on the sidewalk. And that's how a lot of us built friendships. It came out of this Times Square show. And so there was a fashion room that I remember very well that Jean-Michel was part of. And there were racks of clothes and things. And his contribution was painting the walls. And I wrote a story about the Times Square show for Art in America, and in the Art in America article was the
My
first
first
time
publishing in an art magazine as well.
Yeah, it was the first time that Jean-Michel Basquiat was mentioned as a significant artist. There were stories before about Samo, but it's the first mention of Jean-Michel in the press.
Wow. Well, thank you for that on behalf of Jean-Michel.
Also, I think we might have pissed off some of the collab people. We did.
Yes.
Just saying.
That's okay. I think that's a good thing. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think what's also really interesting is that every artist kind of they have their journey and their intention and their goal, and it's not always the same. You know, I think back then an artist or the persona of an artist was like this one way of doing art, of creating it, or not necessarily creating it, but of being an artist. And I think that one of the things that Jean-Michel did was he kind of turned that on its head and created new possibilities, while also creating kind of this dichotomy of like his group, his friend circle, and then what he was doing, you know, in the ways that that he was choosing to approach his career. So I can see where it's like, on one hand, it's like, we're all having fun. What are you doing? You know, dragging us over to do this other thing. And on the other hand, I think it's amazing because it opens up the world for artists and also for artists of today, you know, who can imagine and create their own footprint in the way that they want to have it, you know?
So think of like the difference between an artist like de Kooning or Rothko, an abstract expressionist struggling in the studio, and then the kind of artists that Kenny became, or Keith, or Jean-Michel, opened up to the world, where their borders were blurred between art, performance, music, fashion.
All unique.
And so it's a whole new type of artist.
Which was inspired by Andy.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kenny, can you tell us more about this Mud Club exhibition in 81 that included both, I guess, all three of you?
It was called, what was it called? The name of the show?
Was that Beyond Words?
Beyond Words. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So Keith Haring was given the space in the Mud Club building by, I'm spacing out of the guy.
Steve Mass.
Steve Mass, the owner of the Mud Club. Steve Mass had been hanging out at our little hangout, Club 57, and he kind of hired all of us to take over the Mud Club. They actually, one night only, hired me to be a doorman.
Oh, really?
And I'll just say really quick. So I'm there. I'm not a doorman, and I'm not a good doorman. And there's this guy, and I look at him going, who does this guy think he is? Trying to look like David Bowie. He's too small. He's too skinny. And I wouldn't let him in. And then literally the guy, he was so nice, and I let everybody in, and he was just standing there waiting. And I was like, okay, you can come in. And then literally within 2 seconds, it was like a wildfire. David Bowie's here, David Bowie's here. And I was like, oh my God. Because David Bowie's like my hero. And there I was like,
you have to have the right person
anyway,
for the right job.
Yeah, I wasn't good at that, so that didn't last. But Keith was given this space, and so he curated this show, Beyond Words, which was pretty much all those people that we had met at the Times Square show and Fun Gallery. I don't know if it was before or during or around the same time, the same kind of confluence of the Uptown, the Brooklyn, and then the East Village, the graffiti, the new wave, hip hop, all this kind of merging together was very exciting.
What was the Fun Gallery? Because I know people, you know,
that's
it gets
important.
talked about a lot. Let's talk about it.
So Kenny named the Fun Gallery.
Oh.
Yes, I did.
Look at you.
So Patty Astor, who was in Wild Style, have you seen Wild Style? She had this little storefront. She also came to Club 57 to that same show of mine. And she, do you want to do something in there? And I said, okay, what do you want to call it? Let's call it Fun Gallery. And then the name stuck because they didn't want to change the, they were supposed to, each artist was supposed to name the gallery, but she had already made the cards for it. So she said, we're not paying extra. So it stayed the Fun Gallery.
It works.
So that was brilliant.
Like, what happened there?
It could not have had a better name.
Yeah.
And also the logo for the gallery was Kenny's.
Yes. It was literally a hangout. Like, so many people met there. Once again, not only a continuation of the merger of these different kinds of young artists, but it was also attracting a lot of these young artists from the Lower East Side that would hang out and meet some of these heroes of theirs. And it was something. I mean, I actually ended up meeting all these kids and going down and painting the subways. You know, I think I'm the only, Jewish white boy to paint the subway in New York City. Anyway.
Yeah. So the Fun Gallery, it was nothing like it. And so it was a couple blocks from the projects, and lots of kids from the projects came over. And so it was an amazing mix of a lot of the artists who defined the scene. There's lots of kids who came in. Did LA2 meet Keith through the Fun Gallery? Probably.
I know that Keith saw LA2's tag around the Lower East Side and was kind of fixated on it. And I'm not sure exactly how he found who it was later.
It was an amazing situation. And maybe Jean-Michel's most exciting exhibition ever was at the Fun Gallery. That was...
What was so different about that one?
Well, I think the authenticity of it. Well, first,
construction.
The work was phenomenal.
And the construction of the canvases, those crazy shaped, tied together stretchers. It was just like funky real. What can you say? Jean at his best.
So there was a commission that was created by Andre Keller, the Luna Luna amusement park, where both you and Jean-Michel put together pieces for that amusement park. Can you give us some detail about that?
Well, actually, it's been in the news a little bit lately because they're trying to recreate it and they're adding some new artists. So I did what they call a Ketzenflieger, which is a ride, one of those rides where you swing. It's like a merry-go-round, but there's swings and you fly out in the swing. Jean did a merry-go-round.
Ferris wheel. Mm-hmm.
Ferris wheel. Oh, Ferris wheel. That's right, Ferris wheel. And Keith did a merry-go-round.
Keith did the merry-go-round.
Exactly.
Right.
This, I have, my stories are not all great, but the whole event itself was pretty amazing. I'm a little bit, let's say my piece got covered in marine varnish and it's all yellow, so I'm not exactly thrilled. We don't know what's going to happen with it, but Jean had the monkey baboon butt.
He sure did, yeah. And some of the words that he used on other works on there as well.
But it was very an amazing thing. It was like an amusement park. They had, not only was it the three of us, we were like the young kids. They had Dali, they had Hockney, they had Lichtenstein, they had these big artists, and it seemed like it was going to be the greatest thing in the world, and then it just rained every single day, and then they closed it.
Kind of like early 2023 in LA.
And then it just sat in storage and rotting and yellowing, and now it's back. It's getting cleaned up, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And I know we talked in the green room about this a little bit, and I know that there's a piece of that for you as the artist where you want to make sure that it shows in the way that you intended for it to show.
Yeah, the marine varnish doesn't look so good.
Yeah,
so
no, you're not happy about that.
They can't take it off, so we'll have to figure out what's going to happen. I don't know.
How were you approached for that project?
This Austrian artist, Andre Heller, who I want to strangle, by the way, is the one that approached me and all the other artists. And it was very exciting. It was like, oh, here, we're going to give you $10,000, which even then wasn't that much money for what we were doing, but it's going to travel around the world for 5 years, and it was going to end up in the United Nations permanently. We're like, oh, fantastic.
Yeah, to be part of that.
Well, that didn't happen, but it's nice to see that it has a new life, or it might seemingly having a new life. And, I put all my heart and soul into that. I moved to some warehouse near Vienna for almost a month painting it myself. So it was very hard for me when it closed, and then they never spoke to me again. So things happen.
And I would ask you about that. You thought the whole thing was destroyed. It was gone.
No one ever told me. No one would communicate with me.
But now here it is. I think that's one of the beautiful things, from the outside looking in, and we were talking about this again in the green room, just this idea and this energy of, the artists that were around there, you, Keith, Jean-Michel, and the fun in being able to participate in putting together an amusement park. Like, what was that about for you? Just,
Well, for me, it's perfect for my art. Like, I would love to do a whole amusement park.
Playful, absolutely.
A water theme park. A million ideas I would have about that. But, just once again, it's very thrilling and exciting to, like, I'm a believer, of course, in hanging a painting on a wall in a gallery or a museum. I think that's great. But I also believe in getting outside of the normal ways that people are used to seeing art. And an amusement park is a fantastic way to involve people. So it's not only something you look at, it's something you can actually be in it and sit in it and have fun with it. And also it's art as well. So engaging. So that's part of the philosophy that I've all embraced my whole life pretty much. Is like things that getting art to actually be a part of your life, not just something to look at.
Right. And there's almost like there's a sacredness to it and a beauty to that, but then it's also very kind of accessible.
Well, it elevates.
Right.
In order to, if you're using the art in your life, it elevates you. It takes the everyday experience and brings it into a higher level. So we need art more in our lives, not just something to look at.
Yeah.
So right now we're sitting in the Michael Todd room, or our recreation of the Michael Todd room.
Recreation, though, is a good word.
These two paintings were created by Jean-Michel for Michael Todd room. But you also were included in that. And so I just wanted to, start that conversation about those commissions that were created for the Palladium nightclub.
Well, we were very involved in nightclubs in general. That's how a lot of us supported ourselves, bartenders, doormans, as you heard, go-go dancer even. Whatever it took, we would do it. So we were involved in nightclubs. So when Steve Rubel and Ian Schrager from Studio 54 time got the Palladium building, and Isozaki, the Japanese architect, redesigned it. It was very slick. It was a whole other step up in another kind of world that we were not so used to, but they asked us to do, we were called the artists are the rock stars of today. That's what Steve Rubel said. We were very happy to be that rock star, but I'm going to take a little credit for these paintings, not painting them, of course, but convincing Jean to be a part of it. Really? Yeah. So I wanted to do it, and then Francesco Clemente was part of it, and Keith Haring was a part of it, and Jean was kind of hemming and hawing, and I said, come on, you got to do it. And I think I was the one that convinced him to do it, and then bang, I swear he did this the next day. We couldn't believe it, the way he knocked this thing out. It was like, phew.
Yeah, we heard that he did it in 2 days.
Yeah, it was amazing. I was like, oh, what's John doing? Oh my God, he did it already? It was like, when did he do this?
That's it is productive.
Yeah. Threw that up.
He did, Let's talk about, and so I got the 8:30 sign. I can't believe we're coming, time is passing really quickly. And I want to make sure that we get in some of these other moments. The New York New Wave show.
Jean was basically a huge star. There was like, how many hundreds of artists in the show? Curated by Diego Cortez. Came after the Times Square show. And basically, Jean totally stood out. And that's how, I guess from there, his show in Italy came. And that's when he came back with all the money in his pocket.
It's so funny how that's your recollection of that entire experience.
He actually had the pocket stuff.
Yeah.
And we were like, whoa, look at these cash.
Well, that was a step of how he went from the underground in the art scene to being above ground.
Right. Wow.
So there was a very strategically placed wall, salon style hanging with the 20 works of Jean-Michel. And that was the central experience of New York New Wave.
And there are hundreds of artists.
Right. A lot
Yeah.
of it was photography, but it was a remarkable portrayal of the visual component of that scene and about the mixture also of art, music, just scene. And seeing that wall in New York New Wave, that's how Anina Nozay got interested in the work. That's how Bruno Bischofberger got interested. And I know the major painting was bought by Christophe de Menil from the famous art patron family. So that was the accelerator.
Mhm.
And it was an amazing thing. Diego Cortez is a very important person in all of this in
Rest in
helping
Who passed away a year and a half ago, I think.
Jean-Michel go from the inside scene to connection with the whole world.
What about the Mud Club exhibition? So I understand, and I did not know this before looking at the notes that were pulled together. I understand that this took place in 1981, just to kind of set all of this in a time frame, and that Keith pulled it together. Can one of you or both of you share a little bit about that, the Mud Club, what that was about, and
Well, it was basically, Keith was very inclusive. So everybody could be in it if they wanted to. I know it was curated, but if you really wanted to be included, you could find a way, unless we absolutely hated you. And then, of course, you weren't.
and that's the fun of it, right?
But a lot of people that we didn't know, oh, yeah, okay, he included them. It was like a survey, I guess, in a way, in a smaller space than the New York New Wave. And it was also curated and made by an artist, Keith. I think it was just like a continuation of this whole group and defining what we were doing and how we were involved. Most of it was, I guess, most of the artists were involved in the street somehow or another. Some, not all of them, but I'd say a good percentage of them.
And it was a nighttime show.
It's a nightclub, of course.
Yeah, you did go during the day like you went to a conventional art gallery. So the Mud Club was the polar opposite of Studio 54. And so the Mud Club was essentially one bare, modestly sized loft. And then they had an upstairs floor. That's where Beyond Words was. Their VIP room. But there was hardly any furniture. There was a stage at one end, and people just stuffed themselves in there and stood up. It was very bare bones, but that was the place where people connected.
A lot of dancing,
Yeah, you didn't need a lot of
a lot
stuff.
of
You just
drugs, a lot of
needed a room.
sweat, everything.
Yeah.
And then a big scene outside in Cortlandt Alley. So when the weather was warmer, maybe there were more people outside than inside.
I think that's one of the things that's so different today about like that club scene, of the 80s where, you just went into a room. There was nothing there. It's just music. It was dark. The music was loud as heck. And it was just like people up on each other dancing,
And Jean was, what a dancer he was.
I know,
He had
I
a special style of dancing.
He did. Can you do it for us? No?
Maybe with the music I can do it.
No, he loved music. He
special
DJ'd a little
movements.
bit, like the whole thing. I know.
Well, for instance, like he had this I'll tell you a funny story.
I wanna
So
hear
my
it.
very first show I had was at Fiorucci. Does anyone know this fashion store? 1979, Fiorucci celebrates the new wave. Klaus Nomi, do you know who this is? A performer. So Klaus performed, I had some paintings. And then about, 2 weeks later, Jean decided he wanted to have a show at Fiorucci. So he and this other friend artist, John Sex, Jean made this painting and this wet oil painting. And remember, they threw it in like St. Mark's Place and the cars had tire tracks on it. And then it was like this crazy, messy, wet oil painting. And so, okay, we're going to go to Fiorucci and show him the work and get a show. So Jean walks into Fiorucci, and Jean had a certain way, as you know, of flailing his arms and his body. It was almost like he had so much energy coming out of his hands.
He had to let it out.
As you can see, that he would knock things over, and when he walked by, things would break, right? My whole apartment, for instance, is broken.
I'm so sorry.
When he come over. Not that I had anything that, whatever, but I remember lots of things breaking. But so then he walked in there with this wet painting and immediately got the wet paint all over the clothes. It was a fashion store. It wasn't a counter. And they kicked him out. And I don't know why he got mad at me.
Did he?
For a long time.
What other stories do you all have? I'd love to.
Oh,
I think
God,
we'd love
there's
to hear
too
some
many.
stories.
Too many
A
stories.
few.
Well, that's a good one.
That's an amazing one. That's actually really funny.
Some I can't tell. We were having fun.
Yeah.
Everybody was.
As you
So lots
should.
of fun
As you
going on.
should.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you're also all in this creative energy with each
so
other.
young. We were
and you
teenagers.
were young and
Yeah.
playing and music and,
And it was literally
making
wild.
art. Yeah.
People say it was wild. It was wild.
Yeah.
And I urge you to look up on YouTube and see this amazing video of Klaus Nomi performing with Kenny as one of the backup dancers.
We need to put that in the wherever the little a link to that so we can all look at that. Jeanine, any closing comments?
For me, it's been such a pleasure to sit here and be in attendance of both Jeffrey and Kenny. Kenny's someone that I've been wanting to hear from for so many years, and to hear all your great stories. Quite frankly, I'd love to sit with a beer and talk about all those other stories that you couldn't tell.
That's right.
You got it.
We want to hear that for sure. Yeah, I think I said this in the beginning. I just want to really thank both of you for your time and for your friendship. And for us, our brother, we've lost our brother, and our father's passed away, and our mom. And it's very special to have the ability to, all these decades later, still be able to have conversations with people who help us, and help to fill in some of the blanks for us. Because as we said before, not only was Jean-Michel not walking around with a beret, but you're just living your life. And so a lot of these stories for us are such a treat for us to be able to hear from both of you, and to hear how you've both been impacted by your friendship and knowledge of Jean-Michel. And so thank you for taking the time. So I want to thank all of you for coming out and taking time out on your Friday night to listen to us talk. The four of us talk. And again, I just really want to thank you two gentlemen for everything, for doing this tonight, and also for everything that you're doing in contribution to the world of art and to the world of expression, and the community building work that you're both doing, and the ways that you've poured your energy into this movement that you're both a part of. And so thank you so much for doing that on behalf of all the emerging artists who are kind of watching and, wanting to figure it all out. Just thank you for that. Yeah. Okay. Well, have a wonderful night. Thank you so much. Jeanine and I appreciate all of you so much, and take care.